He had just left that morning, suitcase in hand, the same calm voice saying, "I'll call you when I get there." It wasn't the first time Ethan traveled for work. He was a professor, always attending conferences, lectures, panels. At least that's what I believed. But that day, something felt different. The way he avoided my eyes when I kissed him goodbye. The way his hand trembled slightly when he picked up the car keys. And the silence that followed after the door closed, it was too heavy to be just distance. For months, we hadn't really been us. Nights had turned into polite conversations, kisses into routine gestures. He said it was stress, that teaching and grading were overwhelming him. I tried to believe that. I wanted to believe that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned on the TV just for the noise, scrolled through my phone, opened our shared apps, the same ones we used to find our way on road trips. That's when I saw it. His car's GPS had sent a notification. Recent destination saved. The name on the screen made my heart freeze. Willow Creek Inn. It wasn't near the university. It wasn't even near the conference he mentioned. It was a small romantic hotel 2 hours from the city. I knew that place. We had talked about going there once, but he said it was too sentimental. Now it was his destination. I remember sitting there staring at the glowing screen in the dark, feeling my chest tighten. There was no noise, no scream, no tears, just a slow realization that something inside me had cracked for good. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I wanted to see what the truth looked like in daylight, so I waited. When he returned 3 days later, his smile was effortless, rehearsed. He kissed my cheek, dropped his suitcase, and said, "It was productive." I smiled back and said, "I'm glad. Can we have dinner tonight?" He didn't notice the GPS still blinking on the dashboard behind him. The thing about distance is that it doesn't appear overnight. It begins quietly, with postponed plans, messages that come hours later, hugs that last seconds shorter. That was our story. Ethan and I used to be inseparable. We'd stay up late talking about everything, his students, my designs, the future we wanted to build together. But lately, every conversation ended in silence. And that silence became a wall neither of us dared to climb. At first, I thought it was just work. He was always so dedicated, and I admired that. He'd prepare lectures for hours, attend meetings, take calls, even on weekends. It's just a phase, I kept telling myself. But the phase didn't pass. It settled. He began to pull away from everything that once made him smile. Music, dinners, even simple gestures of affection. I tried to bring us back, planned small trips, cooked his favorite meals, left notes on his desk. But the more I reached out, the more he slipped through my fingers. When I finally asked him if something was wrong, he sighed. "I'm just tired, Clara. Please stop overthinking." That night, I lay beside him listening to the rhythm of his breath. Steady, distant, foreign. The man who once made me feel seen now felt like a stranger sleeping on the other side of the bed. Weeks turned into months, and in that time, our relationship became polite, functional, almost professional. Ethan started traveling more often. Conferences, symposiums, research meetings. Every trip had a new name, a new city, a new excuse. I wanted to trust him. I chose to trust him because the alternative, not trusting him, hurt even more. But trust, when cracked, doesn't repair with silence. It needs truth. And we didn't have that anymore. I noticed how he avoided my eyes whenever I mentioned his trips, how his phone always stayed face down on the table, how his suitcase, once messy and rushed, became carefully organized. Too careful. Still, I didn't accuse him because deep down, part of me still hoped I was wrong. I told myself that every relationship had seasons, that maybe this was ours, a cold one waiting for spring. But the truth is, I wasn't just losing him, I was losing myself, my laughter, my patience, my peace. One night, I found him sitting alone in the living room. The light from the TV flickered across his face, but his eyes weren't watching. He looked trapped inside his thoughts. "Ethan," I whispered, "are you okay?" He nodded without looking at me. "I'm fine, just work stuff." He wasn't fine. And I think in that moment, neither was I. Because love doesn't end in a fight. It ends in silence. And ours had already begun. For a while, I convinced myself that things were getting better. Ethan started smiling more, talking a little again, leaving small notes on the fridge like he used to. I wanted to believe those tiny gestures meant something. He even invited me to one of his lectures. He spoke about the psychology of honesty, his voice confident and warm, his students hanging on every word. I remember clapping the loudest, proud, and at the same time, painfully aware of how ironic the topic was. But that's what love does to you, isn't it? It makes you defend the person, even when your instincts are screaming that something's wrong. So when he told me about another conference, I smiled and said, "You deserve it. You've been working too hard." I even helped him pack. He kissed my forehead and said, "You're amazing, Clara. I'll make it up to you soon." I believed him. Or maybe I just needed to. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. He used to call at night, even briefly, just to hear my voice. But this time, there were excuses. Poor signal, long days, late dinners. The silence that once hurt now became suspicious. Still, I brushed it off. "Don't be paranoid," I told myself. "He's just tired." But deep down, I knew. I knew because people don't change overnight unless they have a reason to. And whatever reason Ethan had, it wasn't me. The first real crack appeared one afternoon when I borrowed his car to drive to school. The GPS was still on, showing his most recent destination, Willow Creek Inn. Again. That same name. That same small, quiet hotel 2 hours away. My stomach twisted. I wanted to look away, but my hand froze over the steering wheel. I checked the trip history. There were 4 visits in the past 2 months. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's near the conference center. Maybe he meets colleagues there. Maybe, but the word maybe stopped making sense. Still, I didn't confront him because admitting it would mean ending everything, and I wasn't ready. Instead, I became a detective in my own home. I watched, listened, collected tiny fragments of truth. Receipts that didn't match the city he claimed to be in. A new cologne he never wore around me. The way he smiled when a certain message arrived. But I also felt guilty. Guilty for doubting him. Guilty for spying. Guilty for loving someone who might not love me anymore. It was strange how 2 emotions could live inside me at once. Suspicion and hope. Hope that I was wrong. That it was all a misunderstanding. Because if he was lying,
I'd have to let go of the man I'd spent 5 years building dreams with. And letting go of a dream is harder than losing the person. So I chose denial for a while, until denial was no longer an option.
I started to see patterns in everything. The same phrases, the same excuses. He would say, "Don't wait up for me, the seminar might run late." Or, "My phone battery's low, I'll call you in the morning." Each time he spoke, I could almost predict the next sentence. That's how well I knew his script. One evening, after school, I sat inside his car again. I told myself it was only to listen to music on the way home, but I knew I wanted to see the GPS screen. My hands trembled as I tapped recent destinations. There it was again, Willow Creek Inn. Only this time, the timestamp wasn't from a week ago. It was from yesterday. He had told me he was in Tucson, speaking at a conference. Tucson was south. The hotel was north. The coordinates were undeniable. I remember gripping the steering wheel and just breathing. Not crying, not yelling, just breathing, as if the air itself could hold me steady. When I got home, I didn't open his messages. I didn't check his emails. I went straight to the computer and pulled the car's route history. Every trip, every stop. It was all there. A map of lies drawn in blue lines across the desert highways. I clicked through the days, each trip beginning right after one of our arguments. He'd leave angry and come back calm. Now I understood why. The irony was cruel. He'd once told me the GPS was his favorite invention. He said, "It keeps me from getting lost." But it turns out it was the same device that helped me find the truth. The next morning, he called from work. His voice was distant, cheerful, well-rehearsed. He said he'd be home the next day. I said, "Drive safe." But I already knew what route he would take and where it would end. That night, I couldn't stay still. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur, feeling time stretch thin. The ache wasn't just betrayal. It was the realization that everything I defended, every lie I'd chosen not to see, had turned against me. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes later, after disbelief fades. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, disappointment. Because love, when it dies, doesn't explode. It dissolves, slowly, silently, like ink in water. The next day, when Ethan walked through the door, I already had every answer I needed. But what I wanted was to hear him lie one last time. He arrived at 7 in the evening, the sun still clinging to the buildings like it didn't want to admit the day was over. I stood by the kitchen counter, a glass of water in my hand, the car keys placed between us like a boundary line. He smiled the same careful smile and said, "Traffic was awful." I nodded and asked if he was hungry. He said he had eaten on the road. I asked how Tucson had been. He said, "Productive." His answers came too easily, as if he'd practiced them aloud in the car. "Could you bring me your briefcase?" I asked. "I saved the receipts you left on the table. I figured you might need them for reimbursement." He hesitated, only for a second, and then went to the hallway. While he did, I opened the GPS app on my laptop, the one that's synced with the car by habit more than choice. The route glowed across the map, a blue ribbon leading to that same quiet hotel. The timestamp read, "Yesterday at 3 in the afternoon." He returned with the briefcase. I slid the laptop toward him. "Can you point to Tucson on this map?" I asked, my voice steady. He frowned at the screen. What is this? The truth, I said, or a direction for it. He laughed, too short, too thin. Clara, GPS glitches happen. I told you I was at the conference. There must have been a 4-hour glitch to Willow Creek Inn, I asked softly. 4 different times in 2 months? Silence spread between us like spilled ink. He placed the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside, his notes, a pen, a book on research ethics, and, at the very bottom, a hotel parking ticket with yesterday's date. He must have forgotten it was there. He closed the briefcase quickly as if he could push the paper back into the past. I set the parking ticket beside the laptop. I wanted to hear you say it, I told him, one last time. His shoulders dropped, the careful smile disappeared. Clara, I didn't want to hurt you. That sentence, I said, always comes after the hurt. He started to explain things I had not asked. The pressure at work, the anxiety, the medication that had made him feel less like himself, the way failure sat in his chest like a stone. He said he had been scared of disappointing me, scared of trying and failing in ways that felt personal. He said distance had felt easier than honesty. Easier for whom? I asked. He rubbed his eyes and looked smaller than I remembered. I told myself I was protecting you. By lying? He didn't answer. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside, a long, fading sound. I slid the car keys to him. I said, "Open the glove compartment." He did. Inside, folded neatly, lay another parking receipt and a printed itinerary for a city he'd never visited. He stared at it as if the paper might change under his gaze. "Say it," I whispered. My voice shook, not with rage, but with grief that had run out of places to hide. He finally looked at me. He said, "I wasn't in Tucson. I went to Willow Creek." The truth didn't crash. It settled, heavy and final. I kept waiting for you to tell me. I kept hoping you would give me the dignity of the truth. He swallowed hard. I didn't know how. You talk for a living. You teach honesty. You know exactly how. He nodded, eyes glossy, and reached for my hand. I stepped back. The movement was small, but it carried everything I needed to say about boundaries he had crossed and the ones I was building now. I told him I had already packed a small bag. I would stay at a friend's place for a few days. We would talk later about leases, furniture, the logistics of ending a life gently when the break had not been gentle at all. He asked if this meant we were over. I said we had been ending for months. Tonight, we were only naming it. At the door, I paused. I said, "You could have asked for help with the anxiety, with the medication, with the fear. You could have told me you were struggling instead of choosing secrecy over honesty." He nodded again, but the nod came too late to build anything from it. I picked up my bag and keys. I told him, "You once said the GPS keeps you from getting lost." It didn't. It only showed me where I needed to go. I left before he could answer. The hallway felt colder than our apartment. Outside, the evening air held that thin, metallic smell of a coming storm. I stood by my car and took a breath that hurt going in and steadied me coming out. I didn't cry then. Some endings asked for quiet, and I honored that request. As I pulled away, the map on my phone glowed with the new route. One I chose, one that didn't trace anyone else's lies. I turned the corner and let the road take me somewhere I still recognized. Forward. If you've ever faced a polished lie to your face and had to keep your voice steady anyway, tap like.
It helps this story reach someone who needs the strength to choose truth over silence.
He called the next morning. I almost didn't answer, but silence at that point felt like unfinished business. "Clara," he began, his voice lower than usual, slower, as if each word weighed too much. "I need you to understand what happened." Understand. That word had become his shield, the excuse behind every mistake, every disappointment. I never meant for it to go that far. I was lost. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt empty. The medication, the stress, the pressure from work, everything just made you lie, I interrupted gently. Made you build another life while I kept defending you to everyone who said you changed? He exhaled, a long, exhausted sound. "You don't know what it's like to feel broken and still be expected to lead, to teach, to perform. I felt useless. And instead of fixing what was broken," I said, "you hid it behind someone else's attention." He didn't deny it. He just whispered, "I was ashamed." That word landed differently. Ashamed. Not sorry. Ashamed. And somehow that hurt more. "I didn't know how to talk to you. You've always been so strong, so sure. I felt like if I told you what was happening to me, you'd see me differently. I already did, but not for the reason you think." There was a pause, the kind that stretches long enough to show how far two people have drifted. He said he wanted to meet to explain things face to face. I agreed. Maybe closure deserved a voice. We met at a quiet cafe near campus, the same one where we used to mark papers together when everything was simpler. He looked tired, older somehow. I sat across from him, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't drink from. He talked about guilt, about fear, about how in trying to escape his own reflection, he ended up shattering both of ours. He said it hadn't been about love. It had been about control, about proving to himself he still could be wanted. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. You know, when you started pulling away, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was too much, too demanding, too emotional. But sitting here, I realized I was just present. And you couldn't handle presence, not when you were hiding. He looked down. "I'm trying to get help," he said softly. "Therapy, medical follow-up. I want to fix this." I nodded. "Good, you should. But not for me." His eyes lifted, confused. "Then for who?" "For yourself," I said. "Because if you don't, every person who tries to love you next will end up carrying the same silence I did." He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. I placed a folded letter on the table, the one that I had written the night before. "It's everything I couldn't say yesterday," I told him. "Read it when you're ready. It's not an apology, and it's not forgiveness. It's just the truth." He nodded, eyes wet. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "Hate keeps you connected. I'm letting go." The cafe was quiet except for the clinking of cups and the low hum of background music. We sat there for a few minutes in silence, two people who once promised forever, now reduced to what was left of honesty. When I stood up to leave, I felt a strange calm. Not relief, but something steadier. A sense that pain had finally stopped echoing.
Outside, the air was warm and the world felt unchanged. But I wasn't. That day didn't bring peace. It brought closure. And sometimes that's better. Because healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins when you finally stop rewriting someone else's story and start living your own. A week later, I went back to the apartment to pick up the last of my things. The rooms felt smaller, emptier, not because of what was gone, but because of what had been revealed. I opened the closet, sorting through boxes and papers, and found a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was a car service bill. At first, it seemed unimportant, until I saw the note scribbled by hand on the bottom. Next trip, Willow Creek, same time next month. It wasn't dated, it was planned. Even after everything had fallen apart, he had already prepared another trip, another lie. That piece of paper wasn't just proof of betrayal, it was proof of habit. Proof that he hadn't stumbled into deceit. He had built a schedule around it. For a long moment, I just stood there, holding the paper, feeling the last of my denial slip away. Ironically, the very thing that had exposed him, the GPS, the map, the evidence, was something I had once bought for him. A birthday gift. He'd said he kept getting lost on his way to new schools and needed something reliable. I smiled bitterly. "You got lost anyway," I whispered. Maybe that was the worst part. Not the betrayal, not even the lies, but realizing that every tool I gave him to find his way only led him further from me. I folded the note and left it on the kitchen counter. No anger, no message attached, just silence. Because sometimes silence is the message. When I walked out that door for the last time, I didn't look back. The car was parked outside, the same one whose routes had mapped the end of us. I glanced at the GPS screen once more. The saved destinations were still there, but this time I pressed Clear History. The confirmation message blinked. All routes will be permanently deleted. Continue. Yes. I pressed it, and the screen went blank, a tiny glowing symbol of freedom. That was the irony. He had spent months trying to escape his failures, and I had spent months trying to find my way back to him. In the end, it was technology, not words, that told me the truth neither of us dared to speak. Sometimes it takes a machine to show you what your heart already knows. If you were in my place, standing there with that truth in your hands, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know how you would have reacted. It took time for silence to become peace. At first, every sound reminded me of him. The alarm at 7, the coffee machine, the sound of tires on the road. But slowly, I began to realize that absence wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to breathe, to rebuild, to belong to myself again. I started walking every morning before school. At first, it was just to keep moving, to keep from thinking. But one day, halfway through my route, I noticed the sun rising over the mountains, the same mountains we used to drive past together. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for knowing the truth, even if it hurt. It's strange how healing works. It doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in through small moments. A laugh with a friend, a quiet evening with a book, the simple relief of not waiting for a text that never comes. People ask me if I forgave him. The answer is yes, in my own way. Forgiveness isn't approval. It's permission to stop carrying what isn't yours anymore. I learned that love isn't proven by how long you stay. Sometimes it's proven by knowing when to leave. And when I left, I didn't just walk away from him. I walked toward the version of me that I had forgotten, the one who didn't apologize for asking to be seen. A few months later, I saw him once, crossing the street near the university. He looked different, softer, maybe healing too. We didn't speak, but I nodded. He nodded back. That was enough. I drove away, windows down, wind tangling my hair, the city unfolding ahead like a map without instructions. No GPS, no saved destinations, just freedom. And as I stopped at a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Tired, yes, but whole. That's when I realized sometimes getting lost is the only way to find yourself again. If you've ever lost yourself in someone else's story and had to start over, you'll understand what this ending means. And if you're curious about how people rebuild confidence and identity after betrayal, check the pinned comment below. There's a link with powerful information about recovery and self-worth that helped me move forward. It might help you too. But don't wait too long, because in the end, truth doesn't destroy you. It frees you. And freedom is the most honest kind of love there is.